Hopefully everyone's had the opportunity to log into the Whova app. There are some audience polling questions. We'd love to have your participation to make this an even more engaging session. Continuing this morning's great conversations, it's our pleasure to provide to you the first US IPA committee presentation of the day. On behalf of the US IPA IP Awareness Committee, we're excited to share with you the results of our recently completed National IP Awareness Survey. My name is Elizabeth Doherty, and I am joined by my co-chairperson, Mike Waring.
Okay. We're both from D.C., so we bring you greetings from Washington, D.C., where we put the fun in the word dysfunctional. So anyway, we're glad to be here today to talk about a very important topic. We hope you'll find this a useful tool to use in all of your work that the US IPA is going to be doing from now on.
Before we begin, we'd love to ask the members of our committee to stand and be recognized, and that includes those of you who are calling in from home. All right, I know there's some here in our audience today. Warren Tuttle? Thank you. Barry Brager? Barry stepped out. Patrick Kilbride and Bruce Berman. You may be asking yourself, what is the value of a survey? Especially when you hear things like, a new survey out says 64% of Americans own a smartphone, which is somewhat interesting because in a related survey, 100% of smartphones say they own an American. Thank you, Jimmy Fallon. However, we are extremely proud of this project we have undertaken. To our knowledge, it is the first comprehensive national survey of non-IP professionals' perceptions of IP. The effort was to assess baseline awareness of and attitudes towards intellectual property in the US. Let's go ahead and get our slides going here. Perhaps we could have some assistance having our slides posted. Thank you. Our work was conducted in collaboration with The Decision Company, a recognized market research firm who surveyed 1,000 respondents of the US general population, ages 18 and over, from a sample offering a structured representative of gender, age, and race. The findings also represented individuals' party, education, household income, and civic engagement. While our presentation today will merely scratch the surface of the survey's findings, we are happy to share our results with you as individuals and as organizations to reflect areas of opportunity and challenge in the dissemination and education of IP. Because as it was once said, it is vain and useless to survey everything that goes on in the world if our study does not help us to mend our ways. So as we begin our conversation today, we first want to thank those who helped to fund our study, including IP Awareness Committee members Warren Tuttle and Sander Bean, US IPA board members Scott Frank, Joyce Ward, and Josh Malone, and the US IPA organization itself. Thank you for your belief and support of our efforts in bringing it to fruition. We are aware that the Intellectual Property Office of the United Kingdom conducted an IP awareness survey in 2015. However, their survey sought to determine a sense of understanding of IP solely within UK-based businesses. So it was a very business-focused survey, whereas ours sought information and input from average citizens. Our expectation with our survey and its results is that it does serve as a baseline for information. Where do opportunities exist for education and building understanding? How can state IP alliances provide value in their respective communities? And what metrics exist or can be created for evaluating the impact of our current and future efforts across the ecosystem? So has everyone had an opportunity to participate in the poll? Excellent. Well, thank you. And I guess we're still working on getting those slides posted. Perhaps you can see the slides in the app. Get them posted to our screens here today. Okay, the slides are visible to our audience? Okay, fantastic.
So we had 4 major areas of inquiry that we were focused on in this survey. We talked amongst ourselves, worked with the pollster to come up with what we thought were useful pieces of information, data points we could gather from the survey itself. And we went through a number of iterations of this survey before we finally found the right questions to ask. And so that was done. And it sort of breaks down into 4 main areas of inquiry, which I believe are on your screen right now. What was the understanding of IP in general by the public? How much could they appreciate differences between copyrights and patents and trademarks? What were their views about the impact of IP on society, good, bad, or otherwise? And how familiar were they with IP examples? Could they give examples of IP that they maybe use in their own lives? And you see these listed here. These were the core questions that we had based on our internal discussions, and including working with the decision company, which actually designed the actual study itself, which was done several months ago.
Interestingly, we found some of the responses to the asked questions unusual, surprising, and informative. And we hope that you will find the same. At this time, you should be seeing a slide that discusses the respondents' understanding of IP. I think there's been a real question, and it's been brought up even today in our conversation, in previous panels, and in conversations that have been had across our various organizations. How much do individuals know and appreciate and understand intellectual property? Well, surprisingly, perhaps, overall, about 2/3 of Americans say they understand copyrights, trademarks, and patents at least somewhat well, while only 44% understand trade secrets. Now, this understanding is based upon primarily a focus on protection, protecting ideas against theft in particular, and in the idea that owners seek to make a profit using intellectual property.
So for the next slide, you should say something that says respondents' ability to describe the differences in IP. Well, this slide is very telling because if you look at it clearly, what it shows is that even though folks have a general view of the differences somewhat between patents and copyrights and other things, a huge number of the people who participated in the survey could not provide a single example of those differences. So they might think they understand what's going on here, but they really couldn't provide an example, which I think tells you that what people's knowledge is an inch deep maybe and a mile wide. They know a little bit about it, but not much. And that's kind of very, very, particularly for trade secrets, which of course is an unfamiliar term for a number of people. Only 12% had any kind of idea what that is. But you can see that the vast majority of people could not even give an example of what the differences are in IP that we think of today.
So as Mike has said, it seems that the majority of understanding is at a very superficial level. And so while it is positive that they perhaps recognize the tip of the iceberg, they don't truly appreciate what is located below the water. So what opportunities exist with this? Perhaps it's the opportunity to take that understanding and appreciation to that next level. Looking at our next slide, respondents' knowledge of the impact of IP on society. We were delighted to see, and certainly excited to see, that a large majority of Americans say that IP rights have a positive impact on American society. Few feel that the impact is negative. Now, certainly some of those negative voices that we hear in media and that we hear in the echo chambers perhaps reverberate most loudly, but of our 1,000 survey participants, they felt that it has a positive impact on society. So what is our takeaway from this finding? First and foremost, we think perhaps the opportunity for storytelling. And storytelling is a vast and wide opportunity for education. There are so many examples locally, nationally, and globally of intellectual property having an impact on society in a wide range of fields. maybe this is one of our ways to truly bring it home to the population.
Well, let me add also that if people have a generally positive attitude about that, gives us a good starting point to try to increase that and broaden that. So if it would be a harder job to do if they had a negative viewpoint. So I think having a generally positive view of these kinds of issues is helpful as a baseline for us to start. The next slide will talk about respondents' familiarity with IP. And here again, we have a somewhat of a difference here. The people expressed that having some experience with copyright and with trademarks, not so much trade secrets and also patents. They said they're generally familiar with them, but less so trade secrets. 13%, for example, had never even heard of the phrase trade secrets, which is interesting. The other thing that's not on here, which you'll find as you go more into the depth of the survey, which by the way is on the website and can be downloaded and shared with all your groups, is that young people are more likely to say that they have experience with IP. So that's an interesting development that perhaps the new generation, because of the issues of music downloading or other kinds of issues, they have a much more of an appreciation, or at least a baseline understanding of what IP is, and perhaps can express it better than perhaps their parents or grandparents.
As we've indicated, there's a wealth of information in this survey, and particularly if one were to really kind of slice and dice the background data. And that's not something we're taking the opportunity to do here with you today, but you'll see it as you view the report available on the US IPA website. You'll see it in commentary that's now taking place across the ecosystem, those who are kind of rebroadcasting our information. But we do have some additional key takeaways that we'd like to just highlight for you out of the survey itself. And these are ones that we found particularly interesting. First and foremost is, where do Americans as a whole learn about intellectual property? It might not surprise you, for many of them, their exposure to intellectual property is through the media. And as we know, that can be a mixed bag, both positive and negative stories being broadcast through the variety of channels that we all receive, whether it's social media, daily TV news, print journalism. The other most significant way that Americans have learned about IP is through high school civics classes. Now, I know for some of us, high school civics class was a very long time ago, and we might be scratching our brains to think about whether we in fact were taught intellectual property. I think we might guess that it might have come during a conversation about the Constitution itself. But if that's where the majority of Americans are creating their baseline for IP understanding, we certainly have a lot of work to do, because that's a very simple conversation, not one that gets into the depth to truly appreciate and understand the role and importance of intellectual property. Again, on a positive note, 25% of our respondents say they know someone who has a copyright, patent, or trademark. That shows not only an awareness of what IP is, but that ownership can be experienced by people in our everyday lives. So we take that as a positive. Certainly, the next one is a personal fan favorite of mine. A majority of respondents believed that they themselves could have a copyright, patent, or trademark. In doing a lot of public education and training, I always ask, do you see yourselves as able to participate in the ecosystem? And we don't always get a positive reply. So to see that so many of our respondents felt that they could participate in the intellectual property ecosystem was certainly very, very positive. And last but not least, 3 out of 4 respondents have never heard the term patent troll. I recall our immediate past director of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office sharing the story that he was on a ski lift once and was a stranger spoke to him asking him specifically about patent trolls. And he felt that that was a bad sign that patent trolls were really dictating the conversation about intellectual property. If just this common passerby on a ski lift chose to ask him about patent trolls, that was a bad sign, that was really taking over the airwaves versus a more positive conversation.
There are a few other takeaways we wanted to highlight real quickly here too. the first one here is that few people knew about how long either a patent or a trademark or a copyright lasts, the term, which isn't surprising. That's kind of an inside law kind of thing, but it's interesting. The next one is interesting in light of what we talked about earlier about the positive views. About a third of the respondents believe that inventions that benefit mankind, like the COVID vaccine, should not be protected by a patent. So there was an awareness that perhaps that patents might in some way inhibit the creation or the distribution of these kind of vaccines that we might need in a national situation like we've been through with the COVID situation. And of course, then lastly, less than a third of the respondents knew anything at all about the Patent and Trademark Office invalidating patents that courts had already upheld, anything about PTAB. So that's not really very widely known by the public as well. So it's not a big surprise. And again, that's gives us a baseline of knowledge. That's kind of more inside baseball that they wouldn't really appreciate.
So what is the future for these findings? Well, we think it's wide open. Again, we see this as an opportunity for conversation, as an opportunity for dialogue, is a tool to be used by you as individuals, by you as organizations, for our state alliances to, again, hone into areas where there may be opportunities and challenges. So where we go from here, it really depends upon you. We look forward to information sharing, additional data collection, and conversation. So we hope that you'll engage both here briefly. We've allowed a little bit of extra time for questions and conversation amongst the group, but to also continue to see how you would like to see this information. Now, will we repeat this survey? Maybe someday, but we've got to give there to be time for impact. There's got to be time for change. So again, we hope that you'll take an opportunity to look at the information. IP Watchdog recently wrote on the survey, and they've also had comments, but we welcome you to share it with your networks as well.
Yeah, that would be really, if everybody here would share this information, share the links with all the networks that you deal with, thought leaders. This is, again, on the website, can be downloaded. There's also the press release that's on the website that went out in advance of this being made public. So the more this gets out, the more information we share with people. This can be a great tool for the states to use to sort of begin maybe perhaps activities that they may want to use at the state level to try to address some of these concerns. And so that's kind of where we think this would have a lot of value beyond just today, but actually implementing some of these things and responding to some of these things. So perhaps we should see if anybody here has any questions or comments in the next 15 minutes that we have left here.
And while I don't want to put him on the spot, we do have in our audience Alan Marco, who is a member of the US IPA board, who has, as an economist, as a statistician, had an opportunity to assist us in reviewing some of the data. And I just wanted to see if he had any thoughts to share. Again, not to put you on the spot, Alan.
Thanks, Liz. No, I don't mind being put on the spot. It's dangerous to give an academic a microphone anyway. So you said you have what, 15 minutes? Okay. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for putting together the survey. I've talked with some colleagues, some other folks who do a lot of survey research, and we don't know of any other survey that's been done on this scale about IP attitudes in the U.S. So I think it's a great opportunity to dig further into the data. I would encourage all of you to actually take a look at it. I think it was very well done, a random sample, and so take a look at it. And there's a lot of good information in there. And again, some things that were surprising to me. I thought the overall kind of positive feelings about IP. I didn't know if I expected to see that coming out of it. A lot of people who suggest that they know a lot about IP, and then when you ask them specific questions, it turns out it's a lot like my undergraduate students. So I thank you for taking this on.
So we can report on some of the survey that you've all filled in today here. The first question was, non-IP professionals believe that they understand intellectual property, and the answers were true, false, or mixed bag. And I can tell you that it's a mixed bag. 29 out of 45 respondents said it's a mixed bag, and about equal numbers said true or false on the survey that you all filled out, which was good. The next question, what percentage of non-IP professionals indicate they cannot explain the difference between different forms of IP? And it looks like the results range from about 10% to 85%. So there was a pretty wide variance there in terms of how people responded to that. And that's interesting. That shows that even, again, there's a wide range. But as it turns out, the number is quite large, that 70% really couldn't really get into the nitty-gritty about that. I'll do one more here. Which form of IP do you think these folks had the greatest familiarity with? And interestingly enough, the audience, over half of you, felt like trademarks was the most thing they were most familiar with, then patents, and then copyrights, and then very little on trade secrets, which is probably true. But trademarks, everybody deals with trademarks. Every time you go to the store and buy things, you know things by their trademark. But that's an interesting response as well.
Our next question, do you think the public is generally more positive or negative about the ability of individuals or companies to obtain IP protection, whether through a patent, trademark, copyright, or trade secret? Interestingly, our audience answers were split. Yes, it is possible, and equally split with no, it's too tough a battle. And a couple of you said, I don't know. And our final question, from what source do Americans learn most about IP? Oh, this is going to be interesting. News and other publications. Yes, you hit the nail right on the head. Google search, school, advertisements, media, Shark Tank, for sure. Invariably, always Shark Tank. Movies, indeed. There's a lot of movies out there that have some form of conversation about intellectual property. Higher education, and news was overwhelmingly the most popular answer. And as we know from the survey results, that is indeed true.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, over here. Yes. Hang on, we're going to bring the mic to you, Patrick.
Thank you. Great job, Mike and Elizabeth. Thank you very much. Wanted to offer a comment I thought might interest the group. The committee discussed, looked at these findings over a couple months and discussed a few takeaways. One of the ones that I thought was most interesting, and all credit to Alan Marco here, the survey seemed to show that at a general level, Americans appreciate the importance of IP, but they really don't understand it. But then the more they learned about it, the more their appreciation grew. So I think even though, the sort of the top line takeaway is Americans are in the dark, the more they know, the better they appreciate the importance. I think that really speaks to the importance of the work everyone here is doing. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a great point to remind us about, Patrick, as well, yes. And as I said, you'll see the actual raw numbers in the data that's here. So you can actually go through and pull things out by gender, by different classes of people. So you can actually make some assumptions there based on what the feedback was, what was created. Other questions or comments here?
I was just wondering if there has been any similar survey done even among risk management professionals in the corporate community, because I live in the world of trade secret risk, and I can tell you from my own sort of informal discussions with a lot of risk managers that even some of the biggest companies in the world in the last 2.5 years, they do not understand the difference between a patent and a trade secret. Most companies think that if they've got a lot of patents, then they don't have trade secrets. It's an either-or proposition, which is super interesting. But you know, I know that a lot of the risk management programs around the country end up feeding into the risk managers that rise up through the corporate ranks, which is absolutely fantastic. But to date, I don't think a single, at least as far as I know, I could be wrong. One of the universities has a program around intellectual property education within the risk management ranks. And I think that's a great opportunity for all of us here in the room, is to convince the university systems that have risk management programs to focus more on intellectual property. So just a thought and a comment. I'd like to know about any corporate surveys that have been done.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that. Well, we can do some searching about that. And I do think your point is well taken about educating, particularly people who are involved in the process in the higher educational world, to understand these things better. I think we've been given the hook. We appreciate your time today. We hope you find this as a useful tool. Again, it's on the website and along with the press release. And please, 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 put links in there, put it in your social media, share it with lots of people so we can multiply the impact of this all across the country.
Thank you for your time and attention today, and let's move the needle together.